My name is George Abernathy. I am the Chief Revenue Officer for FreightWaves. I want to thank the panelists. Those of you who were here on Monday at Beta Day know that I said that I felt like Steve Kerr, that all I really needed to do was roll the basketballs out and get out of the way and stay out of the way, and that things would go well. Well, that analogy lost some level of enthusiasm last night, so apparently Steve Kerr just rolled the basketballs out and the Warriors decided to figure out a way to lose. Go right ahead for those of you who are Houston fans. So I'm not sure who I should use as the analogy today, because I do have an all-star panel again, and I'm going to stay out of the way as much as possible and just try to let you enjoy and learn from the folks that we have. So let me start on my far right, your left. Jet McCandless is the founder and CEO of Project 44. Jet has 2 decades of experience working in transportation and logistics space. In that time, he's become a recognized thought leader with a track record of innovation and success. Jet's leadership has guided multiple startups from the ideation stage through expansion. Next to Jet is Clint Elkan, who joins us, is a vice president for JB Hunt 360. That is the latest component of its next generation supply chain solution, bringing shippers and carriers together in a single e-commerce platform. Clint is a transportation industry veteran with tech entrepreneur in geolocation-based mobile apps and services. Next to Clint, we have Grant Goodale. Grant is the co-founder and CTO of Convoy. Prior to Convoy, Grant worked at Amazon. So I have, as you remember from my last session, every session needs to mention Amazon, so I got mine in within the first 3 minutes. And he founded and served as CEO of the gaming studio Massively Fun and held senior positions at multiple startups, including Reactivity, which was acquired by Cisco, and Context Optional, acquired by Adobe. And to my immediate right is Scott Friesen, the VP of Strategic Analytics of Echo Global Logistics. Scott leads the analytical function at Echo Global Logistics, a leading provider of technology-enabled transportation supply chain management services. He also represents Echo on the executive board of BIDA, the Blockchain and Transportation Alliance, and serves as an advisor to an artificial intelligence startup company. So please welcome our panelists. It's my expectation that most of you know at least something, if not a lot, about each of these, and may actually be customers, partners, or vendors to each. But I'm going to ask each of my panelists to give a little bit of an extended elevator pitch so that we can level set who they are, what their companies do, and then we'll springboard from that into some Q&A. So, Jet, if you'd start us off, please, and we'll just go right down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So Project 44 is a one-to-many API platform. So if you think of MuleSoft as a horizontal API, Project 44 is a vertical API platform, specifically focused on trucking and logistics. We work with shippers and 3PLs to connect to their capacity providers, which could be a combination of asset and non-asset capacity providers for all modes of transportation, primarily focused on North America currently, and expanding into Europe in Q3.
Thank you. Clint?
JB Hunt, we're a publicly traded Fortune 500 company, do a little north of $7 billion a year in revenue. Operate primarily in 3 segments. We have an intermodal division, a dedicated division, and a highway services. Under that is our asset truckload division, as well as freight brokerage, and have a lot of focus now on kind of our final mile services, and then also our 360 marketplace platform, and that's what I lead, the operations and execution of marketplace.
Convoy is a digital freight brokerage formed in about 3 years ago and designed from the ground up to be a technology company targeted at solving the current and future problems of shippers and carriers through technology and advanced techniques in machine learning and digital connectivity. We are currently focused on the lower 48 domestic market for full truckload, but growing rapidly, and I won't claim a date for our international expansion plans, but watch this space, as they say.
Excellent.
Scott Friesen with Echo Global Logistics. We're a Chicago headquartered full-service 3PL, and we service all modes, full truckload brokerage, LTL, partial, intermodal. We also have a managed transportation offering that's a decent size part of our business, where we essentially handle all of the transportation needs of large clients. And we're headquartered in Chicago, but we have offices throughout the U.S. I guess the phrase I have to use due to financial considerations is we're trending toward a $2 billion revenue year. We're a NASDAQ listed public company. And since the inception of the company, we've been extremely technology focused, and I would actually say technology centric approach to the business.
Excellent. I'm going to just kick this off, and while I'm moderating, if you guys want to ask each other questions, I won't throw a flag or anything like that. So since I failed miserably on my beta panel of asking J.B. Hunt how much of the $500 million is going to be spent in blockchain, well, let's go ahead and bridge from what our keynoters like Bettina were talking about. Let's jump right into blockchain. So of the $500 million, how much is it going to be spent in blockchain, Clint?
Give you the same answer.
Let's assume that you can't answer that question, but
Good assumption.
Each of you, I'd like your opinion on where do you think blockchain will be? I guess one of us was talking about in 10 years, will blockchain be and take out all of the digital freight brokers? But where do you expect blockchain to be in your respective businesses? Scott, why don't you go first?
Yes, it's just a matter of time until we're apparently not here anymore, according to all of the news articles. No, I think in terms of blockchain, I mean, there's so many other technologies that have to come to fruition. One of the things that's been exciting about being here is we're seeing a lot of those technologies coming to life. I think that for our part, I don't anticipate us making a heavy move into doing blockchain development. We certainly haven't ruled it out, but there are a lot of customer and carrier needs that we're focused on in terms of our technology roadmap, in terms of being easy to do business with for our customers, being easy to do business with for our carriers, and taking friction out of the process, adding automations and lowering overhead costs and things like that. So that's really sort of our strategic focus of our technology investments. That said, because we think that blockchain has an exciting part of the industry's future, we definitely want to be a part of shaping the dialogue, which is why we're engaged in beta. I believe that it's far more important for us to make sure that standards are created and then successfully adopted as widely as possible. I think that's, for us, more important than actually developing blockchain technology, because we have partners that we're working with. We work with Project 44, we work with other companies, and I believe that a lot of those companies are going to have probably very good, blockchain offerings that we can engage with. But what I'm hoping we can avoid is a lot of the pain and suffering that's happened with EDI hookups. And I'm hoping that by establishing those standards and having lots of companies on those standards, everywhere from shippers all the way through carriers as well as the intermediaries, that we can avoid a lot of that cost and that challenge.
Excellent. Well, that's very much bridging from our previous panel when Craig talked about the commercialization standards and really trying to make that balance work. So that's excellent. Grant?
Well, I think Scott took most of my talking points, so glad to hear we agree. Yeah, in general.
Well, I'm going to try to find a way to get you guys not to agree here at some point. So,
So in a past life, about 10 years ago, I went through this same sort of standards process around SOAP and XML APIs, specifically around web services security and things like digital signature, integrity, non-repudiation. And it was very clear from going through that process that the real explosion of implementations and, by extension, customer value doesn't happen until we all have at least some inkling that we can interoperate, that the technology meets our use cases, and that there's not going to be some large change somewhere right around the corner that's going to invalidate all the hard work we just did. And so in general, I think, much like Scott said, the best thing Convoy and other companies can do is participate openly in the standards making process and, try to hasten the adoption of those standards through, driving the drafts of the individual use cases, driving the technology drafts that get us to the point where we can all start to, do plug fests and interop and demonstrate that we're actually solving business need.
Excellent, excellent. Clint?
Very similar. Craig Harper is our rep on the bid board for JB Hunt. We want to end the conversation and understand where it's going. But right now on the roadmap, there's so much opportunity for fixing issues and solving better problems for our shippers and our carriers. That's where a bulk of our focus is. It's on how are we going to solve the real problems for both halves of the equation. So that's more where the conversation is within JB Hunt. Matches what they say.
Jed, you've got a couple of customers up here, I know. So where do you think blockchain will play in Project 44 downstream?
Yeah, we're really fortunate, and thank you for that. Our view echoes what they said. The only thing that I might add that could be of some value is it is exciting to see companies like BITA kind of take a run at this and help see this. I believe that a lot of this will be transportation and logistics, or be downstream of where a lot of these decisions are made. So it is exciting to see companies like Echo and JB Hunt really lead the way to help make sure that, that we have a voice at the table as to how these decisions are being made. But I think a lot of it will be at the shipper level, manufacturer, distributor, and then push down to trucking and logistics.
Interesting. Clint, I'll point this one to you. And earlier in the conference, Craig Fuller talked about the survey that we did to try to understand just how large the digital freight brokerage penetration is to this point. I think we talked about 0.2% and something like $850 million. So this is where I'm going to try to get it to be a little bit feisty. You guys reported in the first quarter that it did $96 million worth of revenue. Congratulations. That's wonderful. It is in our belief then, as in our survey, that in all likelihood makes you the largest digital freight broker. How did you get there? And what do you expect to be the way that you will grow that at the pace that you want to? And I'm gonna go to you guys and ask, who do you think your real competitors are? So where's your growth going to come from?
A good question. Let me back up to how we got there a bit. So really 360 is our platform that it's all built off. That's our tech platform. And that was something that we really started back in 2014 and really built that for our shippers. They interact via the Shipper 360 platform. Our carriers interact via Carrier 360. Built both of those out over the years, and then really figured out there's a better way to put this together in the middle and really a better way to do freight brokerage moving forward. And then in April of last year, in 2017, was when we announced Marketplace, which is our platform that matches the two. And so that's where we are. We as far as where's the growth come, it's for us. We have a whole lot of focus and energy on the carrier half of the equation. That's where we are right now, moving the industry. It's traditionally, as long as I've been in it, been done via phone call. Both halves of that, either shippers calling with loads or carriers calling in. Both sides don't have the visibility and transparency into that auction. And so on the carrier side, a lot of focus on how do we begin to give a platform that migrates them from that phone call to using either the desktop in the office or the mobile phone in the cab to do business better. And so for us, we really try to attack it three ways. How can we create a better experience for them? How can we ultimately give back more time to drive? And third, how could we save money? So those are all the things that we're developing and a lot of energy on that. Also on the shipper side, obviously in discussions as we continue to develop that, there's a lot of interest. Both parties want visibility into that auction. So that's how we've been grown today, and where we see it going is continuing to push for that adoption.
Grant, what do you think? If I was saying, I guess I should preclude my question by saying, in the winners and losers world, I think we've got 4 winners here, and that downstream, when we sit here next year and the year after, because this will be a panel that we will get the feedback that people want to see every year. So as we have multiple winners here, where do you see your growth coming from, and who are your primary competitors?
Sure. I mean, I think, looking around, I could credibly argue, I think that the bulk of the freight is still held by very traditional brokers, asset-based companies, et cetera. And so in general, yes, there are other tech companies out there that are breaking into this space, but it's such a large market.
Yep.
It's actually pretty straightforward for all of us to grow, more or less not at the expense of each other for some time. So that said, I think, obviously people aren't sitting still. They're aggressively following on the automation and technology fronts. And so we see a lot of our growth driven by the back office technology that we're building for ourselves and the advantages that provides to the participants in our marketplace. Gotcha. So things like automated detention tracking, things like our new drop trailer program that's going to give a bunch of small carriers access to work they were never able to get to before. Those kinds of programs and the technology behind them are advantageous for both sides of the marketplace.
Feel the same way, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think there's plenty of room for growth. We're extremely bullish about, our company's growth, and our last couple quarters have been really exciting. But I also agree that that taking out friction, that to Clint's point, the ability to give the drivers back time that's valuable instead of paperwork, I think that's going to be the general trend. But the part where part of my team is involved in direct sourcing RFP events, and both on the client side and on the carrier side, on the client side and the sourcing side. And one of the things that's interesting, we were talking about our platform, our RFP technology platform that's used to interact with those carriers. And the gentleman that my team supports from an analysis standpoint, who actually runs those events, was explaining that his team is actually very high touch with a lot of the carriers, because some of them aren't comfortable with the web portal.
Right.
And we want that capacity. And so I think that we have to meet, our customers where they are. We have to meet our carriers where they are. And for the carriers and customers that are comfortable with apps and web portals and all that, we're gonna offer all of those technologies. For the folks that aren't, they're gonna still be able to make a phone call. I do think I can imagine at some point far enough in the future where that group is now a very small minority. If you think about booking your airline tickets, now if you want to do it by phone, they'll actually charge you a fee, because almost everyone's booking it online, and if you're a person who's not comfortable with that, you're going to have to pay whatever it is, $10 or something. I can imagine economic incentives over time that say, we'll do it with you on the phone, but that's going to cost a differentiated amount than a more automated, lower cost structure. And that's not dissimilar to also some of the paradigms that have happened in retail.
Right.
So.
Well, or even in airlines, you see that. I have a 26-year-old who is in the finance department at Allegiant Airlines, and they're very close, I think, to starting to charge you for the air that they'll be providing for you to breathe on that. So there was a common theme within three, and Jen, I'd like for you to think about this as well. With the paradigm shift that's happened in the supply and demand, shippers having had essentially, I don't want to make it too simple, but control for a long time, that really changed in 17. And Clint, you described you're thinking a lot about the drivers today. How does the technology that you are delivering, and including in that Project 44, how does that positively, negatively, or not at all impact the driver? And I'll ask the digital brokers, and then I'll let Jet correct you after what you tell me. So, talk to me about that, not just about P44, but technologies like that and the driver experience.
Well, I mean, there's just so much paperwork in this business. It's one of the reasons why the blockchain and the examples we've seen from Bettina and Don and others, it's so exciting, is that to the degree that we can validate activities happening in the transfer of physical assets and monetary assets, seamlessly, it's just less headache, So I think that's part of it. I think these little devices we carry around in our pockets are so ubiquitous and so central to everyone's day-to-day life that I actually think adoption for drivers and for carriers, I think for certain things is going to be relatively easy. You know, we instituted an internal workplace communication system that's actually called Workplace, and it's actually by Facebook. It's been really impressively successful in terms of how immediately it was adopted by our employees and our sales force. And really the reason is because everyone already knows how to use Facebook.
Right, right.
So everything they already know how to do, they're just doing it within a work context. So instead of like, you know, trolling their friends with a political article,
right,
they're posting something, you know, about, oh, Convoy just made an announcement, and they'll like post an article,
right,
like Convoy did that, or someone's looking for capacity, or someone's talking about a load or a special drop trailer program. But my point of all of that is that the speed and ease of that adoption was based on how aligned it was with activities that people were already doing. And so to me, to the extent that we can create those kinds of similarities for the drivers or the carriers between other things they're already familiar with and the UIs and interfaces that we create, then I think that it'll be a natural flow.
Gotcha. Let me jump in real quick and maybe give you a little bit of a curveball on that one. Are we going to get to a point of app fatigue? I have app fatigue on my iPhone. There's 7 or 8 screens that have apps on there, and I haven't visited many of them for a while. So is there a scale level that you have to get to? Is there the ease of use? Where do you think that breaking point is?
So I think, first of all, I'll say, yes, there's always a risk of app fatigue. Certainly, an app is not a strategy.
Right.
So
that's good.
In general,
if there's a FreightWaves editor in the room, an app is not a strategy is a good quote.
First one's free.
It's the headline for so far. But guys, we still got over half an hour, so we've got a chance to beat it. So come on.
So I think in general, people will use apps that provide business value. So witness every single Lyft and Uber driver. They continue to use both. There's no app fatigue because they are making more money by using both apps. So I think in general, you will not see too much challenge in this sense if you are providing substantial business value to your carrier partners or your shipper partners, whoever you're giving an app to, day in and day out. But the onus is on you, the app developer, and you, the business, to ensure that the experience is such that it's not painful, that it's usable in whatever context that they're trying to use it on a daily basis. Don't use tiny print if you expect them to have it on the dashboard 4 feet away, things like that. But I think in general, also going back to your previous question, the way technology we see sort of improving things for the carriers, so there's the direct piece of, you're getting great personalized work, you're able to bid on it, you're able to claim it, you're able to, dispatch your small fleet. But for us, it's also the indirect benefits for the carriers. So we work to collect, as I'm sure everybody else here does, volumes of data about the shipments that we process. And we work with our shippers to help them understand that data in a context that can both improve their business operations and also make them a shipper of choice. And so, we have customers where we were able to identify that even though their internal metrics, and they were very well instrumented, said that they had no wait time problems between the gatehouse and the dock, it turns out there's a 3-hour wait outside the gatehouse. And so, by helping the shippers improve, and they want to improve, they want to be a shipper of choice, especially in this kind of market, we're able to make life easier for the drivers on a facility by facility and job by job basis.
That's great. So, Clint?
Those are, I'd echo the same thoughts. One, that maybe we've partnered with the University of Arkansas doing some Center of Innovation projects and put things in where one example I come up with, the load recommendations. Again, it goes back to you got to have an app that creates value. That's the end game. But what can you do around machine learning and taking all the data that you're housing and learn from that to put in front what they're already doing anyway, and how do you make that more helpful and make that more valuable to them? So without a doubt, things like that are continue to unfold. I mean, we have data science teams, and that it's north of 1,000 IT and engineering folks on the team, and so just all thinking that way is what do you do with all this data that you are collecting, and what insights can you draw from it, and then how do you ultimately create value, put that in an app, and then it's not a fatigue issue. It's that helps me run my business better. And so then they'll continue to use it. That's a thought.
Jet, you're a little bit Switzerland out there, so talk about where you see the value for the driver or the carrier out there from what Project 44 is bringing.
I thought Scott, Clint, and Grant brought up some really interesting points. I think I agree with you on this app overload. Like
Yeah.
we're seeing this play over and over again. We're seeing very low adoption rate of apps in general by drivers, and they're mostly just applying to the small fleets is what we're seeing, or small owner-operator type carriers. I believe the real elephant in the room that folks often talk around, and I think it even ties to blockchain when we're talking about this, is that the reality is that there is a broken communication layer in trucking and logistics. And when you're building an app, you're trying to solve the problem from the outside in. You're not trying to solve from the inside out. And I get it, it's the blood, it's the guts, it's nasty to solve it from the inside out. But fixing that communication layer, creating that connective tissue, that allows for transparency and visibility into the entire workflow, not just a track and trace and exception management. I think that's what we're seeing. And to kind of echo that point, you talked about the phones and emails and the kind of way brokers and 3PLs are communicating now. You know, we estimate there's about 400,000 FTEs in the U.S. that are involved in this process back and forth. So if you're able to, I know Echo, you guys have done some great things as you guys have created efficiencies, repurposing these FTEs and reinventing yourselves. And what we see in the digitalization of freight is we see the established players that are very progressive, like J.B. Hunt and Echo, heavy investment in technology, leveraging companies like Project 44 to accelerate their roadmap. And then we see a lot of new tech startups out there, marketplaces. There's about 20 of them that are built on top of Project 44 right now. And they leverage this connective tissue that we've built, and then they can focus on their customer acquisition and kind of balancing out this marketplace, which is extremely difficult to do.
It's interesting.
Can I
Yeah,
ask
go
a
ahead,
follow-up
please.
version to my fellow panelists? So the idea of the app fatigue, your point is exactly right about Lyft and Uber, and it's also right about the value. But if you imagine every startup who's trying to create a freight brokerage app, right?
Yep.
Getting one out there. So imagine 50. The difference
Right.
between 50 versus 5, right? There's a network effect here that has nothing to do with technology.
Right.
There's a network effect that the more you have, either on the load side or on the capacity side, right? The
Yep.
more valuable whatever your app or your platform is. So I've sort of come to believe that there will be a handful, not one,
Right.
and not 50.
Right.
I think
Like-
that's right.
There'll be some small set that make up the vast majority of all of the volume, and then there'll always be a long tail of startups coming and going, but like the bulk will go through a few. And I further hypothesize that even though the history is a lot of sort of street fighting and like heavy competition, it's reasonable to believe, just as you see in a 4PL kind of situation, that it's actually maybe better to actually have a traditional competitor solve for this problem, right? And have a value exchange there, right? Rather than a service failure. So my question to you guys is, do you agree with the vital few? And do you agree that there could be a time where there are sort of inter-exchange commerce, essentially, between those platforms?
Please think about it, because I think it's a fascinating question. I appreciate you bringing that, because it is, to some degree, really very different from the model we have today. It's extraordinarily decentralized. There are, the top 25 3PLs and brokers are a few hundred million or more, but then from there down, you go into the 500s that are 50 to 75 to 100, which is real freight, which is really moving freight. So, but your point of it being a smaller set than that, dramatically smaller set that will
Well, it's the difference between our earlier speaker today, I apologize, I'm blanking on his name, who talked about supply versus demand and fear versus greed. So economists look at this whole market and they say, well, shouldn't there just be one giant aggregation of everything, because that would be efficient? I mean, that's the theory, right? Why don't we have that?
Right.
And the answer is his other answer, fear and greed. Right, which is, I'm not going to share my capacity with anybody. They're not going to share their capacity with me. I'm not going to share my customers. They're not going to share their customers, because we're trying to win relative to one another.
Right.
So those two fundamental principles of markets that he discussed are actually in opposition historically in our business. To me, I wonder, like, if you can find the right economic model, could you solve for that in a much more macro way? Sorry,
Yeah,
the question,
yeah.
you guys, are those two questions.
So I think the likelihood of a small number of order of magnitude or more successful than the rest is probably the right way to think about this. I think in general, app fatigue probably sets in above 5 to 10, not 2, but it's not going to be 50.
Right.
And so I think from a business model perspective, the goal of a marketplace is to provide value to participants on both sides for every participant you add to the marketplace. And so I agree that being able to have a fallback or a mechanism by which you avoid service failure that is more collaborative is a really interesting concept. But I think the question is, how do you present that to a shipper in a way that is a clear value add?
Yep.
And be very transparent about the fact that you're doing it, the fact that this is not us sort of baiting and switching or doing something under the covers.
Right. One of the speakers on Monday had that situation. So airlines do that, right? Airlines share capacity to get people where they need to go, but he had a service experience where he couldn't select his seats on the flight because he was booked on one airline, but it was actually getting moved on another airline, and all of a sudden now he's got a bad customer experience.
Everything falls apart, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So Jack can solve that for us by having
go.
all the data just flow.
We get that by like 83? No pressure yet. Hey, Clint, let me spin it. I want you to answer that, but also spin it a little bit differently because you as a company have done quite an interesting spin to or pivot to this new business unit of 2014, but what the marketplace is. How do you, in trying to service those smaller carriers, the mom and pops, the micro carriers, how do you convince them that J.B. Hunt isn't just going to gobble up the freight and manage it through your intermodal, last mile, over the road, all of the different things that you guys do as well, if not bigger than anybody else?
All right, I'll jump to it.
Go right ahead.
To answer, Scott, I agree. We feel the same way. We think there'll be a handful of people at the table. We hope we have one of the seats. And honestly, feel like the adoption of some of the tech players that come into the space and has just helped increase the awareness, the adoption, the change of doing business. And so for us, we've seen it as a good thing, but we don't see just one or two, but don't see a lot that are going to be able to scale either. So I don't know what the number is, but I would agree with that. To answer your question, on the carrier side, we really want to become an extension of the sales force for that small carrier. Still if you define a large carrier as 20 trucks or more, that capacity is still only 17% of the market. 83% of the capacity is still on fleets with 20 or fewer trucks. There's still a problem to be able to get to that capacity. You've got to be able to manage and reach the small carriers. So it's difficult for them in a consistent and joined effort to also talk to the large shippers that because they just can't bring as much capacity to the table. And so from that standpoint, obviously that's one way to do that, to be a sales arm to fill in holes in their network where they need to get freight. But then there's also, we feel like 56 years in it, we understand what drivers and carriers value. We understand what they want when they're on the road. They look at us as another trucker. And we have learned a lot of things and built a lot of great vendor relationships through that. And so how can we leverage what we have and leverage that to create a better experience for them? And again, to go back to that better experience, more time to drive and save money. Every one of our initiatives falls under one or more of those things that we're after. But that's where we're going with it.
So, Jed, if the tables were turned and there were two of your competitors and one Switzerland how would you differentiate Project 44 from those competitors as to where you are today and where you expect to be in the future?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to answer that. So for us, I've been a broker, a 3PL, a tech-enabled digital company. I was part of a founding team at a company called Global Trans.
Yep.
And we ran into a lot of challenges, and it really just came back to that communication layer. So what how I would differentiate myself from competitors is that we are just hyper focused on the highest quality of data coming into our network, normalizing that information, and then making it accessible in anyone's TMS or whatever their system of record that they've invested in. When I see other companies out there that talk about similar on the marketing side, there doesn't seem to be a lot of discipline around what they're willing to connect to. And then, so they'd rather mask that with sales and marketing, and then let the customer figure it out 6 months in that it doesn't really solve the problem, which creates a great opportunity. To answer your question, Scott, I believe there will be quite a few, and it's a race for liquidity. So whichever one of the marketplaces at the top 5 can create the most liquidity, that's who's probably going to win the race. And I think what's really interesting is that we have a Convoy being the new startup, and I would estimate your revenue around 100 million, maybe slightly more. And we have 2 companies that are well established that have some great tech stack and some relationships that bring tremendous value. And so it'll be interesting to kind of watch the race happen. But there's a lot of value in those relationships that I think Echo and JB Hunt have. I also know they kind of let they kind of let the results do the talking for them. So
that is a blessing and a curse as a public company. So I also don't have to prepare for a quarterly investor call. So.
Yes.
Well, couple on the panel do, and others don't. But sort of speaking about the differentiation and where the growth is going to come from. Whether you're public or private, you've got expectations. We did mention Uber and Lyft, but we haven't said, and we're well over halfway through, no one has said Uberization of freight. So I want to congratulate us for doing that. No offense intended to Uber Freight, because they're doing very, very interesting things and are growing. And you guys are sort of in the who's going to win, and it could very well be that both do, but. Let's go ahead and talk about the Uberization of freight and talk about Uber Freight a little bit. How do you differentiate yourselves from them? If I'm a salesperson out there for you, if I'm in Seattle on the phones manning one side of that building or the other, how am I differentiating myself from the other digital freight brokers?
Sure. So I think in general, we can point to our service record, we can point to our tender acceptance rate, we can point to our on-time percentage, we can point to the way that we are very transparent in handling potential service failures, and we can say, like, we will, whatever your metrics for carrier success are, we will beat them. And we've been able to demonstrate this time and time again. We've been able to demonstrate this in tough markets like during the hurricane season last year.
Right.
And to the point where customers are now selecting us in RFPs, even if we are not even close to the low-cost option. And so, in general, again, at the end of the day, it goes back to what value are you providing the customer? And I can talk about technology, I can talk about the automation that we provide, I can talk about the number of shipments per employee at the company as compared to a traditional model.
Right.
But none of these things matter if I let you down. And I drop freight on the floor, and you can't get hold of me when you need me.
Right.
And so, in general, the competitive advantage that we talk about the most is just not the technology itself, but the application and the value that it's going to provide you, both in the moment in terms of shipment success, but also over time as we gather data and are able to tell you things like, hey, there's a really long line outside your gatehouse, you should do something about that.
Right.
Or these are the things you should do with your appointment times.
Interesting. So for each of you, and it might be the more established companies have one thing, but I'm interested in the coolness factor of has the digitization of your model, and I said pivot, you didn't pivot, you guys have expanded, but is Echo cooler to work at now than it was a couple of years ago because you've got this and you got blockchain in your back pocket
Well,
too?
I just joined 2 years ago.
Okay,
I think I'm trying to bring it's a little hilarious that the idea that like bringing analytics to the company is making it cool. That's usually not the reputation,
right.
But we're doing some geektastic things, and I think I mean, for me, the reason why I wanted to work, most of my history was in retail. I ran customer analytics at Best Buy, and I ran analytics at Ulta Beauty, and did consulting and that sort of thing. And what was appealing to me was not only the amount of current data, but the growth, right? All of the new, all of the sensors, all of the new API hookups, all that stuff. So not only is there lots of like, playground for a data science or analytic team, but there's this big growth path. And the other thing that I found really fascinating is that this event sort of indicates how much shift there is in the kinds of questions that are being asked and analyzed and answered. And that's an incredibly fun time to be in the kind of job I'm in. Because historically, as far as I can tell, the obsession was all about optimizing asset utilization. That's it. So you got PhDs in operations research who are building optimization algorithms to get their routing and their warehousing just right. And like, that was it. And as I got to know this industry, I never heard anything about price elasticity. I never heard anything about customer churn and retention. Never heard, and coming from retail, that was like, that was our bread and butter kind of stuff, and it was wild to like not hear anyone talking about that. So we've been able to do a bunch of stuff that, coming from a different paradigm, was like really ordinary and is like kind of new and valuable. So yeah, I think it's a really fun time. I think my definition of sexy is that it's a sexy time for the industry. I think transformation is sexy. I think what we're a part of collectively is a big deal for a lot of people, for a lot of people's lives, a lot of shippers, a lot of customers, and it's going to make a tremendous economic impact as well as social impact, and that's fun.
I'm going to skip over the super sexy Seattle guy here for a moment and go down to the little less sexy Lowell, Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas. If you want to, we can call the hogs and show just how sexy we are. But if we said quants when I worked at J.B. Hunt a number of years ago, I would have had a lot of people tilt their head and not know what I was talking about. Today, you may or may not be willing to share how many engineers are running around and how many quants are actually on campus, but as I mentioned the other day, to be at your hackathon conclusion was really quite amazing, because that is clearly defining a new road for J.B. Hunt. Is J.B. Hunt cooler now than you guys were a few years ago? Other than your role in the organization?
I like to think so. I'm biased, but it's interesting though. You mentioned attending a hackathon, and we do that regularly, and have commercialized some of the projects that have come out of it. For me, I guess the part that's really exciting is to be at a company that's willing to invest and lead to disrupt ourselves. And so we have that in our DNA. If you go back to the 80s, truckers, the thought of railroads, they just hated one another. That was not what you did. And J.B. Hunt went at it different, and that's how intermodal got started and got created. And we without a doubt believe that freight brokerage, digital freight matching, however you want to call it, it's going to look different 1, 3, and 5 years from now. And we're willing to put risk. We have a large brokerage division today, but we're willing to put that at risk, because we think where we're going is a lot bigger opportunity. And so I don't think every company would do that, and is willing to do that. And we're in a place that we are, and have made that commitment. So for me, that part of it's cool, is that we will sacrifice. And sacrifice isn't the right word, but put at risk some of what you do if you think that where you're going's got a better opportunity.
I'll come back to the sexy Seattle guy now. So I have to see, what am I modifying? Am I modifying Seattle as sexy? But is transportation sexy to the very competitive Seattle market?
It has been a huge improvement over the last, say, 18 months as the amount of attention that, yes, Convoy, but also all of the other companies that are really starting to make innovative moves in the space. I find myself not having to sit down with a potential developer candidate and explain why this is a big deal. Most of them have already now got the framework in their heads, and they're thinking, oh, yeah, no, gigantic, hundreds of billions of dollars of market, like touches everything. And so, hopefully we've contributed to some degree to that, but at the very least, I think logistics and transportation in general are much more attractive to the average candidate than they've been in the past. And to be fair, Amazon knows a thing or two about logistics, so it's fertile ground in Seattle. So.
Yeah, that's true. So Jad, I'll ask you the same question. You've been in digital freight brokerage and all that, and now in the technology company that you're leading. Are you seeing a level of greater interest from a recruiting standpoint? Is it easier to recruit these days to bring people in to a technology company such as yours?
I believe that it is, and I spend quite a bit of time in Echo, at least probably a dozen times a year, and they were kind of one of the first companies that I'm aware of in brokerage that made it really cool. Remember that first office you guys had on 600 West Chicago, and that I think it was the 7th floor. And then I was at JB Hunt, fortunately, about a month ago, and I walked out on their brokerage floor, and it's like, wow, this is exciting. I can't believe where I am. I could have just as easily been at a top digital broker in Chicago, so that was really exciting to see that happening there. What's happened is that transportation, I've been in the industry since 1999, and for the first 17 years of my career, transportation has always been thought of as a cost center. It's always been thought of, yeah, we'll get to that. And when Homer Simpson blew up the nuclear power plant, he got put over in the shipping department. And we could see this if you read the book The Box, when they talk about building the container. It clearly states in there that transportation adds no value to the cost of goods sold. And I think this is the mindset we've had for the last half century. Now when we look at what Amazon's done, and now they've said customers are willing to pay 20%, 300% more for a product in 2 days or in two hours, we're challenging some of those paradigms. And I think each, at a consumer level, we're being impacted by the transportation and logistics. And so then it's going into the developers, because they are consumers, of course, and they're feeling that impact and they want to be part of that change.
That's interesting. We did deploy some of the catch boxes, so I'm going to ask one more question of the group, but if you've got questions, please be ready. I'll make sure that we leave enough time for questions. So my last summary question, we showed a fair amount of current data with regards to where we thought the market was, soft in certain spots and all that. Overall, how's the market these days? And how do you, we definitely saw a paradigm shift in 17 and all that. Where do you see 18 and going forward in 18?
I think it's going to be a banner year for us. Our first quarter was absolutely fantastic, and even though, yes, we've seen some softening, you got to put that all in the context of record highs.
What have you?
So our year over year, it's funny because we look at it like, oh my gosh, we're, down a little bit. It's like year over year,
right?
Those numbers are still way up, and you have to, when you're in a relationship-oriented business and you're providing service, you have to try to take care of your customers in good times and bad, no matter what. And I feel like one of the things that's happening right now is we are actually harvesting the fruits of having, sort of toughed it out through, the last couple of years. And now the tables have turned, and there's sort of a big reward because we were focused on service and focused on taking care of our customers and focused on trying to take care of our carriers. And now, everybody, it's sort of come around the other way, and we're able to lean into that and have a great year. So we think this year is going to be absolutely fantastic.
Good. I'll echo everything Scott said. I think we are dramatically up year over year.
Did you say you'll echo everything that he said? Did you say that? I just want to make sure that I was paying attention. Okay.
I'll convoy everything.
Well, again, that's another
really
headline
for At any rate, I think that this is going to be a banner year for us. I think, much like Scott said, the relationship building that we've been doing over the last year through some of the tougher periods is paying off in spades as we've gone through the recent RFP season, and we have nothing but high expectations for the rest of the year.
Excellent. So what's the largest digital freight broker think? I'm just,
it's
throwing one out there, a little softball.
Yeah, it's the same.
Yeah.
It's been great, but we still think it'll be a great year.
Excellent.
It's been good
So
so
Jet,
far.
how do you see your pipeline? I'm guessing is extremely full and.
Fortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a combination of the new startups, but also the established brands coming in, and we're really fortunate, whether it's Monsanto or Bosch or on the shipper side coming directly in, or some of the most progressive 3PLs coming in. We're very fortunate.
Excellent. All right, so we've got about 5 minutes. I can see a hand right there with the lights being what they are. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I want to follow up on an entity that was talked about in a couple other panels, and that's the impact of Amazon within the brokerage space. Can you guys talk about what role they're playing right now, and are they a big enough force that they can help expedite the digitization that you're talking about that may need to come from an outside force?
Great question. Who wants to take it? All right, I'll pick someone. Go ahead.
I think there's a couple of impacts. Clearly, them as a as a buyer of transportation services, they have this huge stick. But I also think that they're an example where certain expectations can get set in the consumer space that start to bleed over to the B2B space. Mm-hmm. So because I'm now in a B2B business, but I spent most of my career in a B2C business.
Right.
I feel like there's this tendency of, well, if I can order my coffee from Starbucks from this app in my pocket and pick it up and it's sitting there when I show up at the store, why can't you show me where my truck is, right, and I can order a truck from an app? And those kinds of moments happen because the line, we're right, people. Yeah, we don't just exist like in a B2B or a B2C context. And so some of the impacts I think Amazon's having actually have to do with expectations of speed, expectations of transparency, expectations of service, yep, that end up having very material impacts on, well, the kind of service we have to deliver, mm-hmm, but are actually being set with those individuals, mm-hmm, as a consuming public, and then bleed over and say, wait a minute, why can't I see this thing in my, mm-hmm, B2B relationship? Yep. Yep. So that would be the biggest impact I think they're going to be having.
Yeah. Good point. Anyone else? No? Got one right here? Yes, go right ahead.
Can everybody hear? Yeah. In what's traditionally a relationship-driven business, if I can address this to the panel, how do you see the digitization of freight brokerage affecting the relationship that one can gain from having that phone call, that one-on-one contact with somebody? Does the digitization of a freight brokerage take any of that away? And how, if it does take it away, how would that affect the market going forward?
Not sure I could make that out. There's a fair echo, but it sounds like
the point of the relationship-based business, and that come to you, Grant.
Sure.
Taking the relationship out. How do you, and are you, and if you are, how do you have that bond be as strong, yep, as that one-on-one relationship might be? I hope I did a good job of summarizing.
Great. Yeah. So first of all, no, we're not taking the relationship out of the business. Right. We're just making it less tactical and transactional. So we have carriers that we talk to on a regular basis, not because there's a problem with a load or because they need to talk to us about some particular issue that they're having, but because we want to understand more about their business, right, and we want to develop that account. Similar on the shipper side, we will go see your transportation team quarterly, we will go see your procurement team quarterly, semi-annually, annually, but you don't have to call us to figure out where a load is. And right, so this is less about taking the relationship out of brokerage and far more about minimizing the number of unnecessary touch points.
Gotcha.
Along that same line, we've actually been in talks about how does our talent pool change with the technology, and the value of people great at relationship building only increases as that relationship happens. Obviously, you need problem solvers, but relationships aren't going away. So to echo what he said, no, we don't see the relationship leaving, and actually feel it may be of more value as we continue to automate some of the more mundane processes that you can do with a system more efficiently and cost effective. Relationships with the other end of the line, we don't see going away. It may look different. Best analogy I have is kind of the financial services industry. The way maybe wealth management has been done prior to E-Trades in those days, they were primarily done to actually do the transaction for you, versus now how do you consult through, and is it a service, and the value you provide. I think that's a decent analogy of where we're headed.
That's a great analogy.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, the vision is you want to have what I'd refer to as bionic reps, right? So they're tech-enabled.
Yep.
You've gotten rid of a lot of the non-value add work, and the focus is on higher order interactions.
We can take one more right here. Yeah. Sorry. Get right ahead.
Yeah, a really well-run traditional freight broker might earn 15, 16% gross margins and a 35, 40% operating margin on that net revenue. And I realize you guys are all scaling this business and you're going to be many times larger, hopefully 2 or 3 years down the road here. But at scale, how do you think the economics of a digital freight broker look different than an at-scale traditional freight broker?
Great question.
Yeah, good one.
Sure, I can take that. In general, I think the interesting side effect of, direct effect of technology enablement is you can dramatically lower the operating cost necessary to operate a traditional brokerage. So if we talk a lot about how many jobs per employee all up can we handle as a company, and how do we scale that number to 10x, 100x, right? So technology and technology-based processes tend to have the characteristic of scaling more efficiently over time and with the addition of additional work, as opposed to human-based processes where sometimes you end up with additional friction because management layers and coordination and all of the sorts of things you get with like large human-based operations. And so for a moment, ignoring just the top-line margin piece of it, which is really a question of buying power. How good are we at understanding our carriers, and how good are we at working with them to get them the work they love and want to do, even possibly at a lower rate. And really it's about shrinking that operating cost so that you have more margin to play with and you can flex with that to either side of the marketplace as necessary to build your business.
I'm going to have to cut it there, but I both want to thank the panel, and there's still networking time that you'll be able to see each of the folks in the hallway. So to the panelists, thank you very much, and thank you for being here. Thanks.